present For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Naomi Coles. As war ravages Ukraine, one of Madison's own is in the region to cover it. You may recognize her name. Formerly with the Cap Times and now an investigative reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Caitlin Farrell is on assignment in Poland with a team covering the crisis for the Sentinel and USA Today. She flew out about a week ago now, stayed a few days in Krakow, Poland, then moved closer to the Poland-Ukraine border. Caitlin is telling the stories of Ukraine refugees coming out of the war zone and the Polish people who are helping them. I spoke with her Thursday afternoon. Well, Caitlin, thank you again so much for agreeing to come on the show. Why don't you just tell me first, tell me where you are and what you're doing.
Sure. So I am in Poland. I'm in a town near the border with Ukraine called Przemyśl. And this is really the main this is the closest town to one of the major border crossings by both car and foot of folks that are coming into Poland from Ukraine. So yeah, I've been based here for the last few days.
Tell me a little bit about and I ask about a typical day, and I recognize you've only been there a few days, so still a lot of settling in to do, and there is no settling in when it comes to this kind of environment. But all that being said, tell me what your days so far have kind of been filled with.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's funny, I just mentioned to my editor, because I'm 7 hours ahead of Central Time right here, and I feel often that by the time it's late enough here for me to check in with my editors and it's morning there, I feel like I've lived 5 lives already. So it's a lot of, so we have a fixer here who's Polish, and also I have a colleague who has a contract with USA Today who's Ukrainian, who also helps report and interpret for us. So we're in a group of people in this car and really have just been going from border crossing to border crossing and talking to people in Przemyśl, the town. And it's just been a lot of, going from one place to the next. So the first day we got to this town, we went to the main train station where trains are coming in from Lviv, which is really it soon will be, if it's not currently the only real operating train station and main hub, because the Kyiv train station is closed. So all the major trains and people trying to evacuate are coming out of Lviv in the western part of Ukraine. And so the train station here in Poland is really busy, and there's rooms and several rooms set up full of cots and blankets and people serving hot food. And so we spent a lot of time at that train station. Then we went to another border crossing called Medica, and that also has been really busy, but the flow, it was busy when we were there, but I think it ebbs and flows throughout the day.
From what I'm hearing, kind of the main people you're talking to are refugees coming out of Ukraine and also Polish volunteers, people who are helping them kind of on the Polish side. So let's talk about the refugees first. What are some of the kind of the most gripping stories you've heard yourself in the past few days?
I feel like it sounds kind of obvious, but, there's a lot of children, young children coming over the border too, with their parents. And so, that's just awful to see and hear. And I think some children, you can tell, are too young to quite fully grasp, what's going on. But I think, too, the train rides and the trips to try to actually get from Lviv or Kyiv over to Poland, people are telling me it takes them nearly 30 hours. And so, as a mom, it's heart-wrenching to see the toll that's taking on mothers and the way that they're trying to talk to their kids and help them understand what's going on, and then the children themselves. We've heard stories too where many people who've been able to come have had to leave people behind in Kyiv, and so as we hear that, what's going on in Kyiv, Russian forces surrounding it, but haven't actually infiltrated the city yet, and a lot of fighting around there. People are just, consumed with worry and fear because they have to leave close family members behind, and at times they had to choose between who they could take. My colleagues and I at USA Today wrote a story where there's a story within that about a woman who had to choose between taking her mother or daughter, and people who are elderly can't be very mobile are still stuck in Kyiv, and it's just awful to hear people talk about that.
And then on the Polish side, tell me a little bit about some of the volunteers and the people who are helping them come over the border.
Honestly, it seems here to me, and from talking to our fixer here who's Polish, that it's like all hands on deck in Poland. So, the refugees I've talked to, both refugees of color, because there's actually a lot of folks from India and the Middle East I'm seeing come over the border, and talking to them as well, and also folks who are white, look, Slavic, Ukrainian, say really good things about how they've been treated by Polish authorities, and everyone I've talked to at least has said that the Polish people have just been wonderful. You can tell, the town I'm in is a really beautiful sort of Austrian-inspired town. It looks medieval, sort of like Krakow is, but it's busy, and people are there's just aid and tents and signs in the windows of businesses, and you can tell that this is what everyone in society, it seems, is really focusing on. And I think people in Poland so far have just told me that everyone's just trying to help in whatever way they can. And I talked with the owner of a local coffee shop today, who told me about how the Polish people culturally still remember what it's like to be invaded from World War II, and how that type of cultural collective memory that they hold as a people really gives them a lot of empathy and compassion for what's happening to Ukrainians right now, and inclines them to really welcome them with open arms. And so I thought that was really interesting too.
When communicating to southwestern Wisconsin, right, or south central Wisconsin, what do you think is the overarching message you want people here to understand about what's happening there?
I just think that, I've spent a lot of, I've spent a fair amount of time in Ukraine, and I guess I know several Ukrainians, now and through my experiences. And I think what just strikes me as an American about watching this unfold is that I think it's important, for people to realize that even if, you've never been to Poland or Ukraine, and it seems quite far away and hard to visualize or understand what it's really like to be here, is that I think they're really not so different. They're really not different from us, and just really want to be able to live in a free place in democracy. And to me, I think a lot of what, this fight is about, and what people really want, is to just have their freedom. And so to me, it's like a bedrock of journalism, and why we do the work of journalism is because we believe democracy is so important. And so none of what I've experienced is scary at all. I mean, I feel very safe. And so I think it's just important for people in the U.S. to read about what's happening, and to understand the history of the place.
It's definitely something that America has a lot less experience in when it comes to dealing with war and invasion. And I think there's so much disconnect sometimes in being able to understand that and put ourselves in those shoes. So this is such a good perspective to include with that. When we come back, big political headlines in Wisconsin this week, and if you love the Cap Times, you'll love my next guest.
For the Record, sponsored by MG&E, your community energy company.
Welcome back. We've got two big political stories to talk about this week in Wisconsin. The Assembly's pick to lead their investigation into the 2020 election drops a report with recommendations that differ deeply from what those same Assembly leaders who hired him say is legally possible. We'll get to all that in a moment, but first, a big decision coming Thursday evening from Wisconsin's Supreme Court. It was up to them to pick a new political map for Wisconsin, and they went with Governor Tony Evers instead of legislature Republicans' choices. Cap Times Capitol Bureau Chief Jesse Opoyan joins me to get through all of this. Thanks for for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I think the first thing to really emphasize here is while Democrats are celebrating this as a win, the state legislature is really not going to change much because of this previous Supreme Court decision that says we have to follow this least change approach to the existing map. So why are Democrats celebrating this?
It's sort of the biggest win they could get out of a spectrum of not very big wins. Like you said, those maps aren't going to change a whole lot. One to watch probably is what the first congressional district is going to look like. But, you know, within the parameters of least change, this was the best option for Democrats from where they sit. So they're going to take the win where they can get it.
Now, it is the Wisconsin Supreme Court making this decision, but is it going to end here?
That's a great question. It could go on to the federal courts. It may very well do that. The fun thing about Wisconsin is everything goes to court, and you never know where it's going to stop. But yeah, in the past, federal courts have traditionally weighed in on a lot of this, so it's entirely possible.
Now, you touched on this, but I want to get into this more because while we're talking about the state legislature, that's obviously got tons of impact on Wisconsin. It's going to stay red-leaning. But the congressional districts, we potentially now have 2 congressional districts in basically in competitive play, or a swing district instead of one, which would traditionally be Ron Kind's district, and now we're looking at potentially Brian Stiles' district, kind of becoming Wisconsin's second competitive district. Walk me through what that means.
Well, it's a pretty big change. It's been a pretty solidly Republican district. This was Paul Ryan's district, you know, before Brian Stiles was elected, and we saw a lot of national attention on that district back when Paul Ryan was in office, and he still came out pretty strongly. So this could shake things up a little bit, but it's an area that's used to having some political competition.
The last thing I want to touch on before we kind of move to the Gableman story is it appeared from the opinion that really none of the judges or the justices are really all that happy with what happened. The Democrats or the liberal-leaning justices don't seem that happy. The conservative-backed don't seem that happy. Walk me through this.
I don't think they want to be weighing in on it at all, to be honest with you. I mean, that's sort of the thing here is it would be ideal for this to be worked out with the legislature and the governor. The court doesn't want to be in the position of drawing maps, and I don't think they're too happy with any of the parameters that they have to work with, but they're doing the best with what they've got.
Absolutely. All right, much more we could say here, but let's pivot to the other big talker, Michael Gableman. He's the former Supreme Court justice now leading Assembly Republicans' ongoing election investigation. And this week, he drops this much-anticipated report, but a reminder first, these elections have been upheld through multiple recounts, reviews, court lawsuits, all of these different things that have confirmed these elections results stand. Now, the headline here, he's calling for the legislature to consider election decertification, basically changing the outcome of the presidential election more than a year later. Now, we know from state attorneys this is not legally possible, but what makes this such a standout move?
As you said, it's not legally possible, but here he is saying that he believes that it is legally possible. He says he disagrees with the expert attorneys that work for the legislature, nonpartisan attorneys who provide analysis on everything that the legislature does. He believes that there are grounds to take a look at it, but this goes against not just what those nonpartisan analysts say, but what Republican leaders are saying. They want to move on. They want to move past 2020. They don't want to relitigate those results, and this was a big step away from that.
I mean, not just Republican leaders, but his boss, the guy who hired him, Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, he kind of put out this really brief statement thanking him for his service, but not really touching on this, right?
Yeah, Speaker Vos's statement didn't weigh in on a whole lot of the content of what came out. He sort of focused on the fact that there are still, I think, 9 or so lawsuits that this is tied up in. The review is apparently ongoing until all that litigation is done.
Let's talk a bit about the response to this report. The Wisconsin Elections Commission, they weighed in. They said there's really nothing new or substantive coming in this report because so much of what it addressed has already been litigated or discussed or addressed in some way. Talk a little bit about how both sides are responding to this report.
Sure, it's 136 pages, but they're right. There wasn't a lot new there. It was things that we've talked about before, from the grants from the Zuckerberg-funded group that went to 200 city or communities throughout Wisconsin, but primarily to those 5 biggest cities, which lean Democratic. It was a lot of conversation about voting occurring in nursing homes, questioning the mental faculties of the people who did vote. All things that have been discussed talked about recommendations for law changes maybe going forward, but no, not a lot new there, and predictably, there are a few on the right who, continue to believe that this is a cause to decertify the elections. There's the entire left saying this is a circus or a clown show, or more seriously, an attack on democracy. And then there are some conservatives and Republicans that are kind of stuck in the middle.
Yeah, and also putting us in the national headlines once again.
We never leave.
We really can't. All right. Jesse, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
When we come back, I'm sitting down with Democratic Representative Gordon Hintz, who, after stepping down as Assembly Minority Leader, he's also now saying he won't run again. Welcome back. Until January, Representative Gordon Hintz was the Assembly's minority leader. He served in the Assembly since 2007, and now the Democrat from Oshkosh is announcing this week that in addition to stepping aside from leadership, he's stepping away from the legislature and not seeking re-election this fall. He joins me now. Representative, thanks for coming on.
Happy to be here.
Did you know when you stepped down from leadership that you'd also be stepping away completely?
I was pretty sure. I definitely wanted to take some time to think about. With a 2-year seat, it's always difficult because you can't wait until the end of the 2 years. You have to be raising money. You have to kind of think things through, and it's a big commitment. But the same issues that were impacting me as leader, COVID, a young family, demands on time, were certainly impacting me as a representative as well.
I know you haven't said exactly what you're going to do next. Are you thinking private sector? Are you thinking some other government position?
I'll be honest with you. I've never viewed this as a job. I viewed it as public service, but I'm sort of looking to the future, and that I don't know. I have a little time. I'm going to kind of see what's out there, but I don't have anything lined up, and maybe some of it's figuring out what I want to do next. But the timing was right for me, and I'm looking forward to the next challenge.
Bit of a vague answer, politician. You're one of a dozen lawmakers in the Assembly alone, stepping away for various reasons. So when should we start seeing this as some kind of fundamental shift in the building, perhaps comparative to 2010 that ushered in a large wave of new lawmakers?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that things are challenging. Politics are more toxic, more negative. There's a lot of angriness to some of the political dialogue out there. As someone who's straddled different periods, I'm not sure that impacted my decision as much as that I've done this for a while and I was ready for a new challenge. But it may be why a lot of people are frustrated. We have had turnover lately, but some of the people that are stepping down, Representative Tauken, even Representative Steineke, have done a decade or more, which I don't think could be said as a short service. So, I think this happens periodically based on how long people have served. And when you have to make a decision every 2 years about running or not running, in my mind, I didn't want to stay too long. I want to be there when I'm invested, when I'm totally fired up and can put my all into it. I feel like I'm leaving on top, and that's kind of the best way to do it.
Looking back, what's a high point for you?
I mean, I think the high point, I could go macro or micro. For me, growing up in Oshkosh, graduate of public schools, 2 parents that were taught and public servants, getting the chance to represent Oshkosh and Madison, advocate and fight for the people here, help people individually with casework, and advocate for things that I think benefit the community are the most fulfilling things. We were able to get a lot of infrastructure projects done in terms of the Grand Opera House and the first new academic building at UW Oshkosh. But I was able to get some things done in the public health, consumer finance, the first payday lending regulations in state history. And to me, it was always about trying to find a way to add value. Whether you're in the majority or the minority, you got to find value in the work you do to try to make a difference. And every day was interesting, and I've worn a lot of different hats, from being leader to being on the budget committee. But every session there's been something that's been really fulfilling, that I feel like I made a difference, and that's the best feeling.
Do you have a favorite story or two from your time that you could share with us?
There's no shortage of stories, but I will definitely miss the people. I mean, it's a pretty exclusive club, a pretty eclectic group of individuals from around the state that kind of bring their background. And for me, that was so much of it as well. we have so many great women leaders out there that advocate for moms, for women's health issues, that really helped give perspective, and they were so effective. My colleagues of color could really make great arguments for why we all need to statewide make the kind of investments and considerations in communities of color, and why it mattered. And I think having that kind of direct exposure helped me appeal to my own constituents about those issues. So, I've met some really great people, made some great friendships and relationships, and I'll definitely miss working with those folks.
Last question for you. Do you have a warning for your own party as you step away?
I don't have so much of a warning as, clearly a lot of the demographic trends and a lot of the challenges that we face that have kind of come since Donald Trump was president. I always believe you got to have a message that reaches everyone. I think we need to be aware about some of the targeted issues, perhaps, that Democrats over-focus on. But never take anything for granted. Try to listen. Listen to listen. Don't listen to respond. And you got to meet people where they're at. I always tell candidates running for the first time that you don't get to choose the issues. Go knock on doors and just ask people what's on their mind, what they're interested in, and what they're looking for. And when you listen and you think about what you believe in and what you think you can do, that's what should formulate your message on why we need to, elect you to office and what you're going to do in Madison.
All right, Representative, thanks for coming on the show, and best of luck as you explore your next steps.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.